Hi everyone, it's James here from Pro Tools Expert, back with another gear review. This time I'm very lucky to have got my grubby little mitts on the new USB 500 rack from Aphex. Yes, it's a 500 series rack, plenty of space for 4 500 series modules, but this baby has a twist in the tail, which is fantastic. Not only is it a 500 series rack, it's also a fully fledged USB audio interface. So yes, you've guessed it, 4 of your favourite 500 series mic pre's straight into Pro Tools via one USB cable. No messing about with multiple connections. We like that a lot. So let's get up close and personal with this thing and see what's going on the front and on the back. So here we are up front on the USB 500 rack. Here are our 4 slots, our 4 500 series rack slots, and you can see the receivers in the back there. And on the right hand side, this is where we get down and dirty with the control section for the USB interface. First of all, our main master volume pot, which is great. Mono switch, so we can check everything checks out in mono. And our dim button. The dim button knocks the main left and right outputs down by 20 dB. We then have 2 headphone pre's, and trust me, these are nice and loud. They can even take on me drumming, and our 2 headphone outputs. Has to be said, these are the same output. They're not 2 independent mixes. Nice LED logo there, and the main power button. So here we are around the back on the Aphex USB 500 rack. Main outputs on 1/4" jacks. SP diff I/O, so giving us another 2 inputs, so potentially this is a 6 input audio interface. Our clocking via word clock, and any of you who listened to the podcast last week will know how much we love talking about word clock. MIDI I/O for external synths and things. USB 2 connection. And an internal power supply. So all we have is the kettle style lead to connect it to the power. I hate wall warts. I have an allergic reaction to them. So keeping the power supply nice and internal is a good thing. Okay, so moving over to this side, we have our inputs for our 4 500 series module spaces and our outputs for our 4 500 series module spaces. So if we want to use this just as a generic normal 500 series racking unit without the audio interface, we can do. However, things do get more interesting when we employ these switches. Now you can see here I've got my module input source and module output source, and it's pretty easy to work out what these are doing. Obviously, if I'm tracking and I'm using these as a mic pre, I have it set to XLR input. And my output, I can either choose to send straight to the XLR output, or I can choose to use the module output and route straight to the USB. Now, on modules 2 and 4, we have an extra option allowing us to stereo link, thus making these a stereo pair of modules. So if you have something like the Envelope 500 from Alicia, which we'll use later, I'm going to have this stereo link. But for now, I'm going to keep those in mono. And what I also have is a way to use the USB 500 as a channel strip. So what I can do is I can have my input from module 1 set to XLR, and then I want the input to module 2 to be module 1. Now this can be really handy, so I can actually effectively daisy chain from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Very, very cool indeed. And the last setting on the input is from USB. So if I want to use a module in the rack for some outside of the box processing, something like the Envelope 500, which we'll use shortly, I set this to USB, and obviously in a case where it's a stereo pair, I link them together. And I'm now taking my USB signal from Pro Tools, routing it, then I'm going to route it back through the module and out to the USB 2 connection. Very, very cool indeed, making this a very, very versatile little box. These dip switch settings might be a bit confusing to start with, but it will all make sense when we actually start using it, and I'll show you that as we go through. So I've installed 4 modules in the rack. I've got the Warm Audio WA12500, the Focusrite Red 1, and my two favourite overhead mic pre's at the moment, which are the Aphex J Pre 500s. These things sound awesome. So we'll record some drums, then we'll add some bass and some guitar to that and see what results we get. So that's the drums down, 4 mics, overheads, kick and snare. This time I'm going to put some bass down, and I've used my RH750 TC head. I'm miking the cabinet with an AKG D112, and that is running through the Red 1 500 series preamp into Pro Tools. So let's see how that goes down. Okay, third track, guitar this time, running through my trusty JCM 800, mic'd up with a single Sontronics Delta. That's running into the Warm Audio WA12 500, and I've got the tone button pushed in this time to try and fatten things up and give me that nice big rock and roll Gary Moore-esque guitar sound. So let's blow in some guitar on top of that. So you can see and hear that we've got the start of our track coming together quite nicely. I've tweaked a few things, jiggled a few things about. I've made a stereo pair, a single stereo channel of the overheads, so I'm only doing one channel now rather than two. And I've moved some, sort of done a quick, very rough mix and got some effects going. I've applied the CLA drums plugin on the snare, but it's not really working on the overheads or on the kick drum for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to treat these separately outside the box using the USB 500 rack. I'm going to use the Envelope 500 on the kick drum in mono mode to try and get some bit more oomph, a bit more power into my kick drum. And I'm going to run the overheads through the J-Pre 500s, juicing them a little bit using the mic limb technology, the Aphex mic limb technology, and run those a little bit harder to try and pull up the tom sound because it's not really cutting through in the recording we've just made. So I'll show you how to set that up in Pro Tools, and let's get on with it. So here we are around the back of the USB 500, and taking a close-up look, you can see exactly how I'm going to set the dip switches in order to use the modules in the front exactly as I want them. Channel 1 is coming from USB and is going out through the module. Channel 2 I'm not using in this case. I'm not going to stereo link them. I've got channel 2 engaged from module 1 should I want it, but at the moment I'm not going to bother too much. Channels 3 and 4, although they are the same type of signal, they're both the overheads, I'm leaving them mono so I can treat them independently, and they're both getting their signal from USB and going out through the module. Over into Pro Tools, the most important thing we now have to check is the round trip timing, the timing latency. So I'm just setting the outputs of my audio click that I've recorded. And I'm going to record over the top some audio click, which has gone the round trip through the module. So now if I zoom in, I'll bring the waveform levels up. You can now see that I have a latency or a delay. And yes, we could do this the automatic way, but sometimes the old-fashioned ways are best. So all I have to do is measure from start to start, or peak to peak, whichever you prefer. That is exactly, believe it or not, 20 samples. So the round trip latency through the USB 500 is 20 samples. I think the buffer size I'm using on this session is 128 samples. So the round trip latency is 20 samples. So all I now have to do is shove this click audio forward 20, and they are perfectly in phase. And remember, I'll have to do this for my audio that I record later on. So what I've done in Pro Tools is I've set my kick drum to go out through slot number 1. I've created a new kick channel, which I've called Kick 500, and the input of that is slot number 1. So you can now check out how I'm using the envelope 500 to alter the sound of the kick drum. So I've set up the overheads in exactly the same way. I've set the outputs to go to slots 3 and 4, created a new channel and made the inputs for that channel slot 3 and 4. So let's just record both of those. So there you go, that's the new USB 500 rack from Aphex. Very, very cool piece of kit, one that I'm looking forward to putting somewhere about there, maybe in the studio. This is going to be my external kind of compression and EQ rack, I think, rather than my preamp rack, just because it's now so easy to reamp or to EQ and compress outside of the box using something like this, rather than having a faff with the routing within Pro Tools. I'd love to say I had something negative to say about this thing, but genuinely, it is just ticking every single box for me. So with that, I've been James. Hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you again soon for another gear review.